no is not the end of the negotiation. That is just the start. If you get resistance, that's expected. It's not going to be easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it easily. I want that to be a trigger in everybody's brain to ask a question. We don't just take the no and leave. When will you have the budget? What are the milestones? What are the markers? You're collecting information. You're charging your battery with lots of power, with lots of information, so that when that milestone time, whatever comes, you get to come back and say, remember when you said?
That is what we said.
If you shut down at the no, we're getting nowhere. So get curious, ask questions, start proposing alternatives, get creative as much as you can, and that gets you out of most jams.
Salary negotiations can feel daunting. Knowing what to say, when's the right timing, how to articulate your value, there's so many variables at play, and it feels like it's easy to get it wrong and leave money on the table. Using the right communication, data, and questions will help you nail your negotiations with confidence in order to level the playing field, especially as a woman.
Hell yeah.
Today's guest, Fotini Iconomopoulos, global negotiations expert working with some of the biggest companies in the world, is no stranger to what it actually takes to come out of negotiations on top. In this episode, she reveals the deepest and darkest practical strategies that will transform your negotiating skills from fear and resistance to problem solving and win-win outcomes. This is episode 16 of Tiffany's podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the show. Fotini, it is so great to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. I'm very excited to be talking to you and your audience.
Oh, likewise. I mean, I know we go back a little while, and I'm so glad that we were having the chance to do this, because if anyone doesn't know who you are, they need to. Fotini is an incredible global negotiation expert. I mean, you work with some of the biggest companies in the world, and fun little fact, you've even helped me once upon a time in a pretty critical negotiation when I was at L'Oreal. And I know you've done some incredible work with our client community and are always a huge advocate of helping build negotiation skills, which is such an important skill set to master. So I'm so excited to dive in a little bit. I know it can be one of those topics that's like really daunting for people, whether negotiation overall, salary negotiation. So I think we're going to unpack quite a bit together today, Fotini, and see what you're kind of noticing in the work that you're doing, and kind of unpack that a little bit. So are you ready to dive in a little?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start here, because I know that a lot of professionals that I come in contact with, that when we think of negotiating, it's often like, oh gosh, like it's this dread of like, I know I need to do it, but it's like very intimidating. And so I do feel that mindset just plays like a huge proponent in how we negotiate and the success of that negotiation. Mm-hmm. But what mindset shifts would you see that people need to overcome that level of fear to negotiate successfully?
Well, So when I run intimate workshops with folks, I have the chance to spend a lot of time with people. The very first question I ask them is, what is your biggest fear about negotiation? And two answers come up. So one is people don't want to look stupid. They're like, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want them to walk out going, he should have asked for more, she should have asked for more. But the overwhelming response, even bigger than that one, is I don't want to damage relationships. So there's a massive misconception that negotiations are always combative or they have to be competitive and that kind of thing. And the reality is most of the negotiations that we do are collaborative negotiations, and the greater outcomes come from collaborative negotiations even when you're in competitive mode. So if we can change the mindset of this doesn't have to be this, combative boxing match type of thing, it's actually just two people trying to reach an agreement. It's two people trying to problem solve together. And that can be a very positive thing instead of that daunting, negative, risky consequence.
I love what you're sharing there, Fotini, because I feel like a lot of people often revolve to your point around the combative piece, but it's not as instinctive to think about it as problem solving. And so that really removes that intimidation factor where it's like there's a common goal we're trying to work towards. Mm-hmm. We might have different perspectives on both sides, but let's actually work together and find that happy medium that can be a win-win. So interesting that you're seeing those patterns come up, and even about the relationship piece. As I hear that often too, right? That fear of like, I don't want to hurt a relationship that I have. I don't want it to come off or strain, this great contact that I've had in my network. But there's also like such a risk of not negotiating because you'll probably end up resentful of maybe leaving money on the table or feeling like you sold yourself short for something that's actually just a general myth. Are there any other myths that are coming to mind for you, Fotini, as you're thinking about negotiation and the work that you do in that space?
Well, I think you just raised a really big one. It's the fact that people assume that not negotiating is going to save a relationship. But they miss the other side of it, is that negotiating and standing up for yourself and getting respect from other people can actually be a relationship builder, because you yourself aren't going to feel great about this scenario if you hold back, if you didn't speak up for yourself, if you didn't advocate for yourself. I see this all the time in salary negotiations, especially with my MBA students, but it permeates to all sorts of different types of negotiations. So if you're sitting there holding back all for the sake of this relationship, and you're building this resentment over time, you're actually destroying a relationship when you could have resolved something much faster, or you could have gotten an answer, killed your curiosity when they went, you know what, we don't have the budget for that right now. We will have the budget for that a year from now. Now all of a sudden you have released all of this. It's like a balloon that was about to explode and you got rid of some of the air, and now you can actually be a bit more flexible and take a bit of a breather. So that for me is a really big misconception that I think needs to be resolved, and I'm trying my hardest to bring it to the forefront of people's minds on a daily basis.
No, I think what you just shared is so helpful, Fotini. And as I'm thinking about it too, our community that tunes into this show weekly is a lot within that corporate space, right? And so I feel like there's these two angles that we can see: the internal salary negotiation, and then also external if you're going for a new role. And when we think about the relationship building piece, or this fear of like hurting relationships or burning relationships, I imagine it might look a little different between, let's say, an external role where you're almost building these new relationships in real time, where you are going into a new organization, versus an internal salary negotiation with relationships that you've built that are better established. Are there any nuances that you're picking up on there in those types of fears that might come up and how to better address them?
I would say the principles are the same. I mean, you mentioned something important. In your current employer, you may already have trust. But even in those circumstances, some people are worried that they might lose that trust, or that they're going to damage what was a great relationship. So let me not put it on a bad path because I've got to deal with the repercussions for a really long time. So the principles are the same whether it's an existing or a new one. But with the new one, you have a little more work to do to build up that initial trust. So the potential for damage seems greater in the brand new one, because maybe they'll renege on that deal. Maybe they'll pull it back. But the reality is they're about the same, because at a subconscious level, I have to assume most people are also fearful of damaging the existing relationship. Is it as resilient as I think it is? Things are okay with me right now. If I'm going to stay with this employer for a long time, I want to be thinking about the long term. So the reality is you have some more work to do in the external relationship to build up that trust, to make them understand that you're not this greedy, awful person. But on the internal piece of it, we've worked for an organization, both of us at different times have worked for an organization where things could go sideways if you ask the wrong way. So you want to be careful in both of those circumstances. And you can build trust quite quickly with folks. It's actually quite shocking how quickly you can build it with people. So I would hope that people don't hold back. And because there's so many people I've met in my life during my office hours and my audiences and so on, who will say, well, I don't want to rock the boat right now, so I'll take this offer and then I'll negotiate later when it's time for a promotion. And you don't have nearly as much power then as you do at that initial stage when you're first entering this organization.
This is so valuable. I'm so happy that you broke that down. And it's actually bringing up another thought for me, which is timing, because I feel like that is also just such an important consideration here. And I'd love to maybe tackle this in two ways, Fotini, like timing within, let's say, exploring a new role. I get this question a lot. It's something we support our clients with very much, around like that right timing to bring up salary within a interview process, as an example. Like, when is too soon? Should you be the first one to bring it up? What does that look like? And then maybe the second one we can tackle together is, in a company, there's different internal climates going on. There might be high pressure situations. There might be restructuring happening. And so when do you know it's the right timing to have that conversation internally when it comes to, let's say, a salary negotiation? So maybe let's take that in two stages. Let's start with kind of an external role and timing, and what you recommend in terms of the right steps to follow there.
So when it comes to bringing up the subject of salary, I want people to think of it as dating. So you wouldn't go on a first date and at the beginning of the first date start talking about the second date. You're like, no, I got to like you. I've got to decide whether I'm interested in the next step. So build up that interest, build up that demand. The more they like you, the more power you have. And that's when you know they're interested. And I talk about power as like charging your battery. When your battery is charging and it feels really good, that's when it's an appropriate time to bring up the salary thing. Most of the time in job offers and salary negotiations, the employer is going to bring it up, and that signals, yes, we are here, we're interested. And they may do it in the form of, what are your salary expectations? Now, every time I meet people, every time I talk about this, I do a lot of lectures, especially for MBA students on salary negotiations. It is like everybody's fear of answering that question because they don't want to go too high and piss off the people that they're with whom they want to build this relationship, but they don't want to go too low and risk setting themselves up for a subpar salary. So they're like, I might go too low for the sake of the relationship. I might go too high and destroy the relationship. So I'm just going to let them put their offer on the table first. That will be safe. The challenge is that is allowing them to have what we call the anchoring effect. And the anchoring effect means it's like an anchor on a boat. You drop the anchor so that you don't drift very far from the area in which you've just anchored your boat. You don't drift off to the other side of the ocean. You stay in this general vicinity. And what we know about human behavior, and we've got lots of studies in negotiation to show the same, the person who anchors first finishes in their general vicinity. You're going to finish much closer to where you anchored if you're the one that goes first. So that question of what are your salary expectations is a wonderful question. It is a gift. They're gifting you the opportunity to anchor your number first. But people are still full of this fear of, what if I go too low? And what if I go too high? There are ways to mitigate that risk. You have to make sure that you do your homework. You need to make sure that you are well versed in what are the going rates? What are competitive salaries like? What are other people making at this organization? What are other people making in the industry? How does this organization compare to the rest of the industry? You're going to do all of that research by getting online, by talking to people and so on, so that when you get to answer that question, you get to answer it credibly in a way that is not going to be damaging. They can't perceive you as greedy or any of those things or aggressive if you're saying, based on this research, based on my knowledge of the industry. If you are coming with facts and you're framing it as this is a fact-based thing, there is very low risk of them perceiving you as this greedy person. But if you were to start saying, I think I deserve this, well, I don't know why you deserve this. I think you deserve a lot less. Now we're getting into an argument. So we're doing that research so that we are prepared for the conversation. You could, over the course of, let's call it the end of the first date, if we're going to use that analogy, as you know they're starting to take interest in you, because you've done your research, you could drop in hints that you know what's up, that you know that they're going to be paying competitive salaries and you expect competitive salaries, by saying stuff like, I'm so excited to continue this conversation because I know you are from what I see and hear, you are best in class and you compensate your people appropriately and you value your people appropriately. And that's signaling your values. It's signaling you've done your homework. So when it's time for offer making, they're going to put a much better foot forward.
That's so helpful. That's so helpful because it is such a common trap. And I love how you broke that down. I love the language that you're using here, Fotini. I hope everyone's really picking up on that, of speaking to facts and like based on, right?
Yeah.
That sounds a lot more confident and assertive than, I feel I should get this, or I think I deserve that. Like that is a recipe for disaster, I would say, in any type of negotiation. And I also really appreciate your guidance here of like planting the seed, right? Like everything that you've just shared isn't like going super hard too quick on a full-on negotiation, but it's setting the tone. And I would encourage our listeners to really hold on to this, because we have seen, I would say more instances of getting further along in interview processes only to then learn there's a really big disconnect in salary expectation or salary brackets that are offered for the role. So these are really good pointers, Fotini, that you're bringing forward of how to kind of assess that. Maybe not right out of the gate in that very first moment of the interview, but getting those feelers going so that everyone's on the same page and it doesn't waste anyone's time. So that's really, really helpful, I think, from the external role opportunity exploration. What about timing when it comes internally? I know, we do a lot of work with folks within different company settings, and we hear of sort of the more classical promotion timelines and whatnot, or even starting in a new role. How early should I be maybe bringing up salary growth, a salary conversation? What are your thoughts around that?
So I have two strategies for this one. The one is power led. And you have the most power. Your battery is most charged when there's good news about you, when you're coming off of a big win of some kind, when someone's giving you high praise, when you've just completed a really cool project. That is the optimal time for you to ask for things because you're in a powerful position. You are valued and people want to reciprocate that value. So even if it's, if your company does annual salary increases in December, but you just had a phenomenal project in February, why wait until December? Like, don't get stuck by these traditions or by this structure. We can go outside of it. It's the whole thing about thinking outside the box. I want you to kick the box away and don't even worry about a box. So, those are the moments to go, hey, based on this performance I just got, based on your review, based on what the client just shared, based on this new set of skills that you have seen I have, what are the next steps in order for us to make sure that I'm leveraging these things, that I'm bringing more value, that I'm getting rewarded for the work that I'm doing, that I'm able to continue to provide extra value for this organization and the motivation cycle accordingly that goes with that. So I would say when you are getting that praise, that is the moment for you to capitalize on that because your battery is fully charged. You want to go in there when you have the most power. If you don't know when those moments are, I encourage you to have what I call a feel-good folder. And so I have one in my Outlook folder. I literally, every time someone says thank you to me for something, I get a great review about something, an award comes in, a new milestone for my book sales, whatever, I screenshot it, I send it to myself, and it's sitting there. And so I have in chronological order all of the cool stuff that I've done. So if you're like, I don't have any power though, you go back to that feel-good folder and you're like, actually, here's all the great things that I've done. I'm charging my battery just by looking at them. And now I have something to articulate to management when that time comes. So it also helps with your mindset to go, yeah, I deserve this, because you need to start with the mindset. I have people all the time go, can you just put a bug in my ear and you tell me what to say when I go in there? And that would be so much fun. But it's not an effective strategy because if you are so nervous, if you don't feel deserving, it's going to come out a jumbled mess and people will see right through that. So build up your mindset using this feel good folder. Have these facts, these credible testimonials from other people, the thank yous, the accolades, the projects that you've completed, the awards that you've gotten, whatever it is, so that you now come to the table with, based on these things and what other people are saying about me, how do we make sure I'm rewarded for that? Now, if you are the person who wants to wait for the traditional timing of all of our conversations internally, I have one set of students who works in the consulting world where they have July is like the time where everybody does their reviews. And I remember our L'Oreal days, December, and most of consumer goods and manufacturing does that more traditional end of fiscal year timeframe. If you're waiting for that meeting, you're too late. So what happens is if in December, you have a meeting with your manager where they give you your feedback and they said, congratulations, you've had a great year, you get a 2% merit increase. And you're like, 2%? I deserve way more than that. Here's all the reasons why. I have a wonderful feel-good folder that says all these reasons why I deserve more. The problem is they now have a battle to fight internally because a month before that, in November, a bunch of executives got into a fancy hotel, sat in a big fancy boardroom and decided, hey, we have so many promotions and so much money to give in salary increases this year. Who should they go to? And someone was at that table representing you. Did they know all the things that they should have known about you? So that's when the real negotiation happens on your behalf. Your negotiation process starts before that because you need to make sure that person is ready for the negotiation. You need to prepare them for that meeting in November. So by October, you need to ensure that they know all of those things. But you don't necessarily want to give them a cold shower in October either. You may want to have these, well-timed regular feedback loops. I call them spotlight meetings, where maybe it's called, our quarterly meeting or a weekly catch-up or a monthly catch-up. And that's when you get to highlight the stuff from your feel-good folder. You go, hey, here's what I'm working on right now. Would love your feedback about this. But really, it's an excuse to put a spotlight on the cool stuff that I've done. But I'm going to play to your ego and make you think I also need your feedback. And I do. It'll be useful. But I really want to put a spotlight on the great stuff I've done. I want to make you aware of the great stuff that I'm capable of my potential, of my accolades and so on, so that when you go in there, I'm top of mind. My performance is top of mind. So you are negotiating on my behalf in November so that by the time December rolls around, we're not course correcting. That's a much harder conversation to have than if you have the earlier ones. So based on what I've accomplished so far, if this is end of August, what do we need to do, or what do I need to do to make sure that I'm on track for that promotion or that big salary increase by the end of the year? Now you're bringing them into the process with you. You're making them part of the problem-solving team. And those are the things that are going to get you much more accountability and much greater outcomes than waiting until that December meeting when they have very little wiggle room, because how are they going to go and fight for that money that's already been allocated? There's only scraps left over at the end of the year.
Oh my gosh. I can't emphasize how important this is of everything that you just shared. Like, yes, yes, and more yes. I mean, there's a few things I'm really picking up on. I would say probably the biggest theme is like proactivity and knowing when those internal conversations are happening. Like, you bring up such a good point that most organizations have those behind closed door moments and conversations around growth and progression and movement. And so just by knowing when those moments are happening, you can reverse engineer backwards, what you should be doing at different moments leading up to that. And I really, really like that you emphasize, Fotini, integrating, let's say, your boss in that conversation. So they're now a partner with you on this. You're not here on a lone island hoping that it's just going to happen. Fingers crossed. That's a really poor strategy for success. This is going to help bring that intentionality, the proactivity, and the right type of facts and data backing to make it a no-brainer that you are set up well for that eventual outcome, right? So yes, waiting until those actual moments are happening, a performance review or anything along those lines, it's already far too late. I've seen that mistake happen so many times. And again, it really pains me when I'm like, oh gosh, if you only prepared, 6 months ahead of time, 4 months ahead of time, it would have changed that outcome so dramatically for you. But you bring up some other really good points. We talked a little bit about it so far around like preparation, right? I think that's a big theme here too, of going in ready, like leading those conversations, not relying on someone else to do it for you, but helping them to go to bat with you a little bit better. So what kind of non-negotiables would you say, Fotini, are really key to prepare in advance leading into, let's say, a salary negotiation?
So you absolutely 100% need to know the competitive landscape. So what else is going on out there? I mean, Google can help you some, sites like Glassdoor and so on. But if you are a student and you have an alumni office or a career center, they're great sources of information. If you belong to an industry of some kind, go to industry events, find out what the statistics are, what engineers are being paid, or what vice presidents of sales are being paid, and what kind of markets and size of companies and all that kind of stuff. Anything that you can do that will give you power, because I think we can all agree, we've heard the old adage that information is power. So find out all of that information so that you can go in there knowledgeable, so that later you're not going to regret it going, what do you mean I'm the lowest paid consultant in Canada? I didn't realize that. Well, I want to know, what are consultants making in Canada? What are people in my field making? What are people in my field in this size of company making? Those are the types of things I want to make sure that I understand. But you can't just get it from the internet. You need to talk to people. Now, here's where it gets tricky, and this is the nuance you have to be careful of. If you're a woman, for example, you might only talk to other women. We know women are not paid as well. There's a gender parity issue. So if you're only talking to other people who are getting paid on average 17% less than everyone else, well, then you may not have the most accurate data, the most complete data. You want to make sure that you are talking to people who are not just the same mindset and profile as you. You want to talk to a diverse group of people so that you have diverse thoughts, so that you can get all of the data points instead of just one tiny set of data points. So the internet, the resources, the industry resources, as much objective information as you can get, but also talk to as many people as you can. Those are one of that information about what are those salary elements like, but then also understanding, what is the job description like? Does your salary match the job descriptions that you're talking about out there? Are you taking on way more responsibility? I mean, I have clients in the States who have a different business card internally than they do externally, because internally they don't hand out VP titles very much, but externally they know that, the Walmarts of the world, the large corporations and stuff, respect higher titles. So internally they're a director, but externally they're actually a VP. So we want to make sure we understand, does that title and that salary that goes with that title match your responsibilities as well? Understand the entire picture and the context. Then understand a little bit more about the organization and the person with whom you're discussing things. What is their culture like? Are they as competitive, or are they a scrappy startup? They're not going to have the funds that a massive consulting firm is going to have if they're a tiny little boutique startup. What are the other things that are negotiable or valuable in those scenarios? What are they capable of in terms of maybe it's equity shares? What are those equity shares going to be worth? If companies are going to offer you things like bonus payments, well, you need to do your homework and ask questions maybe even in the interview to go, well, you've mentioned bonus payments. How often do you pay out those bonuses? Don't just depend on the facts. Get all of the context around the facts. Get as much history and patterns as you possibly can in order to make better decisions when the time comes. So you're doing your research in advance, you're talking to people, you're getting the stuff from the internet and all that kind of fun stuff. But even in the negotiation itself, in those interviews, learn a little bit more about what are the responsibilities? What am I signing up for? How does that match how people get paid outside of this company? What are the other elements of culture, of, value, of flexibility, of all of those things that will put money in your pocket or keep you from spending money outside of, the four walls of your office? Those are the types of things that you want to be thinking about to make the best possible decisions. That comes with preparation that is just non-negotiable.
Yeah. I couldn't echo that enough. I think that's such a helpful breakdown just to give those gauges of where to seek that information. And I also would say it just helps you so much in determining our value. That's a lot of like the question that comes up. It's like, how do I know what my market value is? What do I do and how do I frame that? So these are some really practical steps that someone can take that's listening to this to go in prepared. And I'll maybe add, and I'd love your thoughts on this too, Fotini. I think some of the questions that we help our clients with a lot is like, how do you actually like get that information from someone? Like, I never want you to just have a conversation and be like, so what are you making? Because that might feel like, that's a little bit too forward, right? So what I really like recommending is, just letting them know that you really respect their career path or the growth that they've had in a certain organization, or that, this is a path that you're really keen on exploring for yourself. And you'd love to get their gauge of what they feel would be like a reasonable salary bracket or salary expectation for this kind of position. So you're almost kind of using this like third party reference. I'm not talking about me and I'm not talking about you, but because you have this understanding working in this company, you probably have a good pulse of what's reasonable or what I could expect or what I should be aiming for. And it helps remove a little bit of that pressure of like talking about your own salary, which someone might be comfortable doing, but probably not if it's someone that you're meeting more recently. But I'm curious to get your thoughts if you would recommend like a similar approach or maybe some different type of wording that could help actually pull out those insights from people that we're networking with.
And that's exactly the approach I recommend. And here's why. When you ask somebody, hey, what do you make? They're going to be like, whoa. In both in Canada and in the US and in other countries, everybody, even within Canada, we have different laws in every province about what can you share and what can you not. And in the US, I believe there's federal laws that changed under Obama, but people are still scared because they're like, well, what if I signed a contract that says I'm not allowed to share anything? Whether or not that's legal is a gray area. So out of fear, they're like, well, I'm just not going to share anything because that's the safest thing to do. Rightly so. And you don't want to put somebody in a position where they have a reason to be fearful. So you can't start asking them for personal information. But what you can do is do what you just recommended. You can ask for objective information. And what I like about what you suggested is you started with a compliment. And a compliment is that way to build some relationship traction. People feel really good about compliments. And so that makes me a little bit warmer to you. It makes me want to share with you. It makes me feel good. So if I'm feeling good, I'm more likely to open up a little bit more. So you have some phenomenal expertise. I love your career track. You're somebody who clearly knows about this industry and so on. I would love your advice on what would you expect for someone with my experience level? Or how do you think companies like this size or that size compare and compensate and so on? So when you ask them almost like research questions as opposed to personal questions, you're going to get a lot more information. You might not get the direct answer you want, but you're going to get so much contextual information that you can narrow it down, and you'll probably get even more valuable information than just that one data point of one person's salary.
It's so good. Okay, I'm so happy we're on the same page. I always love kind of digging into how to get that type of insight so that you also feel a lot more confident going into those eventual salary negotiations. And let's maybe get a little more granular for a sec too, Fotini, because I know you're so good with this. Like when we think about a go-to structure or a framework, if you will, for how to open a salary negotiation conversation, how could someone do that without it sounding confrontational or entitled? I know we kind of touched on this a little bit, but are there any other types of like language examples or wording examples that you feel are really helpful to ease into something like that?
Yeah, the way we ease in is we start with a frame. The temptation is to get down to business. I want to get this over with. So let me just tell you what I want. But that's like giving someone a cold shower. It's a shock to the system. We want to give people a frame, and a frame that's going to make sense to them. Why should they care about making sure that you're compensated equitably? Why should they care that you're able to pay your bills and so on? It's so that they don't have low turnover. It's so that they don't end up in the news in lawsuits later. That doesn't mean you go in, so I want to, please don't make me sue you later. Like that's, we're not starting out with a threat either. We're starting it with a frame. So in order to ensure that I can see myself here for the long term, in order to make this as sustainable as possible, I would love to make this a place where I see myself, retiring someday if possible. So I want to make sure we have a sustainable compensation package that's going to make that feasible. I could start with something like one of my values is equitable workplaces. And that's one of the things that drew me to you. Now you're paying a compliment and you're, again, bringing this common denominator of our values. So what do you do in order to make sure that that equitable circumstances are guaranteed? Do you have research about these things? Do you have transparency issues? How do you structure these things? So you can even engage in the form of a Q&A with them by demonstrating your shared values in that form. But it's this framing of what is that positive intent? What is that positive intent for them? You've got to think about it from their perspective. Why should they care? Why should they get involved in this conversation with you in the first place? Because they actually don't care if you can pay your mortgage. They don't care that you want to, save up for a wedding or something like that. They care that you're not going to quit though. And you won't quit if you're paid appropriately, if you're compensated in a fair way. You won't have one foot out the door looking for what is that next job that's actually going to pay me well. So how can you frame it in a way that's going to make them want to engage with you in that conversation? That's how we start. Then you want to make sure you start. I have a 4-piece framework in my book. I talk about power, people, process, and communication. Power comes first. You don't communicate your proposal first. You start with power. Set yourself up for success. Demonstrate to them that you have a fully charged battery. The 2 most powerful words, we've used them a few times in this conversation, are based on. Because based on signals, this is going to be based on information, this is going to be credible, this is going to be fact-based, this is not opinion. So you're going to say, based on my experience, based on my education, based on my success with similar projects, based on whatever reasons why they're talking to you in this moment in time, based on my research on the industry, based on my knowledge of competitive offers. You're signaling, here's the things that we're doing here. And you're also going to think about the people. I know you value the same things I do. So based on all of that, or based on something you said, based on the values you shared with me, I'm thinking about the people and what their words were. So this is how we're mapping out the process. We're starting with that frame. We're building up our power first. We're building the relationship with the person. Then you can get into, based on all of that, I am thrilled to be talking about a potential long-term relationship with you and a great long career. Here's what I would expect for someone with my experience level and so on. That's the last thing you're going to say. And then you're going to shut the heck up. You're going to put it out there in a really confident way. You're going to sit pretty and look as confident as that you want them to see you, so that they know, oh, this person isn't messing around. They are very credible. They know exactly what they're talking about. You've done all of the work. You've laid the foundation. You've built up your power. Once you put your proposal on the table, stop. Anything you say after that is actually going to deplete your power. So let them react. Get more information from them. If you are so nervous about silence, that's when you're going to ask a question and prompt them to do some talking to fill the silence versus feeling like you have to give away information yourself.
Okay, this is too good. And by the way, I love your book, Fotini. You know that. I recommend it to a lot of folks. Say, let's get more. I mean, I really want to double click on what you just shared, because silence is very powerful in a lot of conversations, actually. We talk about this a lot in public speaking and communicating effectively, around having those moments for pause, because it also builds a lot of impact. But in that negotiation conversation, it gives the moment to just let things settle and sit and not dig yourself into a hole where you are now oversharing. So I'm really happy that you emphasize that, because nerves can really lead us so easily to just ramble and feel like we need to fix and fill in that idle space. But that is actually like probably one of the worst things you could do. I know we talk about that often, of like, don't keep talking, just let it sit and allow the company, the recruiter, the hiring manager, whoever you're talking to kind of then take it from there. I do know something that comes up often is, whether you're having that confidence to have the negotiation, you're doing the conversation, and you get met with, we don't have the budget right now. This can happen, I'd say, pretty frequently inside an existing company. Like, you're working hard, you're doing all the things, and then you're met with that statement. And I'm curious your feedback here, Fotini, of how you recommend someone should respond. Because a lot of people that we've spoken to instinctively will feel like, well, that's like a final no, and I shouldn't push any further. And I tend to disagree with that very much. But I'm curious to get your input on that as well.
So one thing I want people to remember is that no is not the end of the negotiation. That is just the start. So if you get resistance, that's expected. It's not going to be easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it easily. And that's why we have so much fear and trepidation around negotiation. So no is just the start of the negotiation process. I want that to be a trigger in everybody's brain to ask a question. We don't just take the no and leave. If they say, we don't have the budget for that right now, that is your trigger to ask a question. When will you have the budget? And if they say, I don't know, in a while, when business turns around, how do we know business has turned around? What are the milestones? What are the markers? So that you're collecting information. You're charging your battery with lots of power, with lots of information, so that when that milestone time, whatever comes, you get to come back and say, remember when you said, their words used against them, not against them, used for them, is far more powerful than you imposing your words. So when you said this milestone, it looks like we've hit that milestone. So how do we make sure that I get the compensation we talked about however many months ago? And in that moment, if they're not answering questions, if they're like, well, I don't know, that for me is a red flag. If they're being really vague, if they're dismissive, if they're trying to not give you information, that's not a relationship. That's a red flag. And so that for you in any type of salary negotiation, whether it's with an existing organization or a new one, should be a signal to, I need to do something about this. I need to find out why they're not being transparent. Maybe there's a good reason. Maybe there's information that they're not allowed to disclose right now, but they, in a great relationship, that they would say, I can't talk about it right now, but I promise you, here's when we can talk about it. That's what people will do. They'll give you some compromise of, if not now, here's when. And so with a new employer, especially if they're being vague, you're entering into what could be potentially long-term, or you're potentially leaving something really safe behind. Make sure you know who you're getting into business with. So are they trustworthy? Transparency is a sign of trust, but shutting down and not sharing information, that's a little sketchy to me. It could be that they don't know the answer, and that's okay with me, because they can go, you know what, I don't know, but let me come back to you on that. Because if you say, you're putting a lot of emphasis on this bonus versus the salary, what do bonus payouts look like? And they could go, I don't really know, but let me come back. That for me would be a huge green flag versus, well, I can't discuss that with you. Why couldn't you? If this is affecting, if you have data that shows how often the company does well or pays out and so on, you should be willing to give me some context, maybe not a specific answer, but give me some context, give me a next step. And so that no is your opportunity to fact find, and it may even lead you in the moment to a better solution. It may mean, okay, we're putting this negotiation on pause and we're coming back later, but it may mean, well, we can't do this for you on compensation, but we could do this other thing for you that will actually put money in your pocket. And so there's lots of cool conversations that can come up, creative solutions that could come up if you start asking questions. If you shut down at the no, we're getting nowhere. We're not increasing the size of the pie. We're not creating those win-wins that people are chasing. We're just stopping the conversation. So get curious, ask questions, start proposing alternatives, get creative as much as you can, and that gets you out of most jams.
No, I think that's so helpful, Fotini, with what you're sharing. And it ties back to something you mentioned earlier, right? About kind of building the business case, if you will, or the support towards the outcome that you're striving towards here, right? So even if it's that no for now, doesn't mean it's a no for never. And asking the right questions and getting those insights will help you understand where those gaps are and how to better prepare for that, so that even when those conversations do end up happening, when budgets open up or things are improving internally, it'll line it up so much more seamlessly versus expecting it to just happen for you. So I love this level of proactivity that's sort of integrated in your approach to get those insights and ask the questions and be curious. It's going to help your boss and other decision makers internally better support you in that when that time comes without any unnecessary blind spots standing in your way. Maybe on a kind of a similar note, what would you say, Fotini, are your best tips for navigating an internal promotion where the company expects you to take on more responsibility but won't offer a compensation increase upfront?
I would say have them craft a plan with you then. If it's not going to be upfront, how are you going to be compensated, recognized, and so on? So I would also look at how can you mitigate some things. If they want you to take on more responsibility, how are they going to support you through that? So if you're taking on more and more responsibility, you're more prone to burnout. And so you should be compensated for that. And compensation might be in the form of dollars, but it also might be in the form of support. So what kind of headcount are you going to give me to take on this type of stuff? Or what kind of things are you going to take off my plate in order to facilitate making this possible? You can ask those types of questions as well. So it's not a just pile on more. It's going, well, if we're going to take more on, then we need to redistribute something else. So what are you taking off of my plate in order to make that happen? How are you going to support me to be a leader if you want me to take on more people? I don't want to be figuring this out under this stress. So how are you going to help me relieve my stress? Is it with mentorship? Is it having, sending me to a training for something? Is it giving me skills in some way? You need to be compensated, whether it's monetarily or in the form of stress relief in order for this to happen, or with the promise of something to come. And I don't love empty promises and potential things in the future. I would rather see results, but in some circumstances, it's not always possible. Maybe they're downsizing and there is no budget, and that's why you're taking on the job of 2 people. But are there ways to streamline the way we work then? Are there ways to cut out parts of the process? How can we go back to the drawing board and redesign this so that I'm not overwhelmed? If we need to do this for now, how long do you expect this to last? When do we know we're going to come out of it? How do we make sure that this is sustainable? This is one of my favorite questions to ask. How do we make this sustainable? Because you're saying to them, I don't want to burn out. I don't want to quit on you. I'm trying to find a positive way to make this work. But you're signaling to them, this is a bad idea, without saying to them, this is a bad idea. People don't like to be told things, but they do like to be asked. So I'm not encouraging you to ask for permission, and I'm certainly not encouraging you to ask yes or no questions. I want you to ask how or what questions to get them to a place where they're going to realize how bad of an idea it is, or get you the support to help you through that bad idea. So instead of that's stupid, that's never going to work, or I'm going to lose my whole team if I have to pile on more work to them. Well, how do you think the team will respond after X amount of time under these types of conditions? What can we do to change the conditions to make sure that we don't end up with those results? So you're leading them to the same place, but you're doing it in a cooperative way and tone so that they will see the light without you having to wag a proverbial finger at them in order to do that, because that can be perceived as aggressive, rude, all of those things that we worry about with damaging relationships. But if you're curious, if you ask questions, you can potentially find alternative solutions, but don't just take these things at face value. Find your way of compensation. Maybe it's dollars, maybe it's stress relief, maybe it's leadership, maybe it's support of some kind, maybe it's taking things off your plate, but find what that answer is for you. Don't just stop there.
Yes. There's so much gold in what you just shared, Fotini. And I love this theme that kind of keeps recurring around asking questions. That's a way of really enriching the negotiation, the conversation as a whole, and not feeling like you're boxing yourself in or taking on something that, to your point, literally won't be sustainable, you know, and you have to look out for yourself because you matter, your health matters, your well-being matters. And I would even add, I think it sets the right expectation, right? Because on the one hand, it shows a willingness to help perhaps in a time of need or when things are more strained within a company. And that will go a long way in your perception and this helpful nature that you're bringing forward for others. But you're also not trapping yourself in a dynamic that can be so damaging or spread yourself really thin without a clear kind of eventual reward that you're working towards or something that can be a happy win-win outcome. So that is so helpful. I think that's going to really resonate for our listeners who might have been in the situation or might face the situation coming up. I'd say another situation, Fotini, that comes up often, even for more of like an external role exploration, is when you are working towards that offer and that fear, like you mentioned before, of them pulling the offer if you negotiate too hard, or that worry of maybe saying too much and then you're going to be back at square one. So what would you recommend for when you're hearing in that process, this is the best and final offer? Like, is that the end? Should people stop? Should they push a little bit more? What would you suggest in those types of moments?
I mean, it really is case by case, and I would question whether it is best and final. When they're using language like that, it really is a clear signal. But if they abuse language like that, if they've said it 5 times and it's not been their final offer, then maybe it isn't so final. But I actually wouldn't want to be working with people who abuse that kind of language anyway, because it just that signals a tactic that's not very trustworthy. If they're constantly saying final and it's not actually final, well, that makes me wonder what your ethics and credibility are like. So I would hope it's more about prevention than it is fixing it in the aftermath. So what can you do to make sure you've explored everything and asked lots of questions before it gets to a best and final? So if it gets to that point, however, I mean, this is a circumstance we have to deal with. I would, again, be asking questions to go, so what is it that's holding us back from being able to do something else? I appreciate that. People want to be acknowledged. You can't just dismiss this best and final. I appreciate you may have run out of budget. What are the other things that we can do in order to make sure that this is sustainable? If this is what you are capable of right now, what does the next 6 months to a year and so on look like in terms of career path and compensation? At least get a visual of what is next so you can find, is this worth sticking around, or is this a best and final and it's going to be constantly awful to me? But I would, again, my go-to kind of tool is to ask those questions constantly. And because questions are going to signal that you're trying to be cooperative, you're not trying to be combative, you're not trying to push back for the sake of pushing back. It is a cooperative, curious way of saying, I'm trying to find a way to make us work together and find a solution. I'd love to know a little bit more about where that best and final comes from. What are some of the limitations that were there? What are some of the workarounds for some of these things? Now I'm a problem solver. I'm not a problem maker. I'm not a problem child. I'm a problem solver. And I'd say, even in that best and final, you don't want to start going, well, I've got a counter for you. I don't know that that's the right approach, but asking a question may open up the door for them to take back the best and final and go, actually, I have an alternative way of thinking about this.
Yeah, that's so key. I'm really glad that you broke it down that way, because that, I imagine, will remove a lot of stress or pressure for people that are facing that type of feedback in, let's say, an interview process or a negotiation process. And I also really love that because it gives you a bit of an insight of what will happen if you are hired. Like, if there's a lot of hardball happening in that negotiation just to get into the company, to your point, Fotini, it might be a little bit of that red flag of like, ugh, is it going to feel like this like every time? You know, I'm putting so much effort into this and it's just constantly met with pushback and resistance. So it's probably a pretty telltale sign. But I love, once again, the reframe of how to use questions to bring collaboration instead of confrontation in those moments. You also mentioned a little bit earlier the importance of what we're seeing from like gender gaps and the dynamics that we might see there with a negotiation. Are there any other things that you feel women need to know right now to level the playing field?
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
I know. We could unpack it and let it simmer a second, but I know it's something that comes up often, and I just value your expertise so much on this and the work that you do, Fotini. So curious if there's any themes or patterns that you find might be helpful for anyone listening to this.
I mean, one thing that gives me hope is that if you look at research from 20 years ago, women weren't asking nearly as much as men. And today women are asking more. They may still not be getting the same results as men. That's why we continue to have a pay gap. So what I would love women to take away is that asking doesn't have to be nasty. Asking doesn't have to be rude. And one of the reasons we didn't ask in the past is that we were worried about the risk. We were worried about the risk to relationships and so on. Today, there are so many different approaches and different ways to manage negotiations that it doesn't have to feel so risky. We had been fed for far too long the examples or the role models of negotiation are what we see in pop culture. So it's, people like, oh, your life must be so exciting. It must be like that show Suits. And I'm like, actually, it's really quite boring. People pay me a lot of money to make sure it doesn't get to that. We have been fed these Hollywood examples and even some media examples of people who come to the table with a lot of power, and the power of Hollywood or the power of money or the power of privilege or whatever it is. That's not realistic for us. So we've been trying to emulate this in a way that doesn't fit our real life circumstances. And so the actual role models of effective negotiation look nothing like Hollywood. It makes them a lot of money, but it doesn't make for real life scenarios that would either get you fired or indicted if you tried to do those things. And that's why we have this risk that's sitting in the back of our minds. So when it comes to anybody who feels like they're coming from an underprivileged or disadvantaged place, if you come to the table with cooperative negotiation skills, if you're coming with a mindset of problem solving and curiosity, there is a lot less risk to be had, and there's actually a lot more opportunity for you. These are the folks that actually excel at all types of negotiation, whether it's negotiating world peace, whether it's negotiating peace in your playroom with your toddler, whether it's negotiating your next salary. If you do it in a cooperative way, you set up your power, you think about the people and you build those relationships, you have a process of framing, and then you come in with that cooperative language of based on here's what I'm reading, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm seeing in terms of me matching your company culture and so on, here's what I would expect. You reduce that risk altogether. And so you need to come to the table super well prepared with all of those things in order to make sure that you maximize those opportunities. But there's loads of ways to reduce the risk and to close the gender gap at the same time.
Big time. This is such a good way of looking at it too, because I think especially for companies that might view like assertiveness as negative, like I think everything that you've just shared makes it feel so much more collaborative, right? It's so much more of a problem-solving type of mindset, like we said at the very outset, than anything else. So these are some really good pointers I know that are going to resonate with a lot of women that are listening to this, and might have felt that hesitation or resistance to go for it and make the ask, right? If you don't ask, you don't get. And I think what you're sharing, Fotini, is really helping very practically to just break this down and go for it with confidence. Maybe in a similar vein, I know we're talking about negotiation, and when we instinctively think of a salary negotiation, we're thinking of the money part, which obviously is important. But what would you say are some of the more overlooked elements in a compensation package that we should be negotiating beyond salary?
So I tell people to make three lists. What are the things that are going to put money in your pocket? Salary, bonuses, equity, whatever that might look like. Then the next list is what are the things that are going to keep you from having to take money out of your wallet? Is it things like paying your cell phone bill for you, or giving you a car allowance, or letting you work from home so you don't have to spend money on transportation and so on? What are those ways that you can save money and actually become wealthier? And then what is the non-monetary stuff? Maybe it's things like having flexibility. Maybe it's the ability to spend time with your children so you don't feel like the world's worst parent. Maybe so you don't have to spend extra time on overtime or extra money on overtime daycare. Those are the types of things I want you to think about, those three buckets. So it's not just about a salary number. It's about money in your pocket, money keeping, ways to keep money coming out of your pocket, and then the stuff that's going to keep you sane to keep the money flowing in and out of your pocket.
What a good three-part type of frame to use for this. It's so helpful, so easy, and a really good way of structuring it. It probably also helps, Fotini, I imagine, in like setting what those priorities are, right? Like you don't really want to go into a negotiation with a massive laundry list of like 10 things that I want out of this. So it probably helps in that prioritization, I imagine, too, of really picking your battles of like, these are my non-negotiables that I really want to go to bat on for this. Would you recommend something similar to use that and not having too extensive of a list of things to negotiate, but really pick like the core 3 or the core 5 that would be most important for someone?
I would say the sky's the limit in terms of the list, but your attention and your focus and your priorities are incredibly important. So one of the exercises my MBA students do is we help to prioritize. But if you had 100 points and you have a list of, let's say, I don't know, 40 things, how would you distribute the points? Of those 40 things, is the one at the bottom of the list going to get 1 point or 10 points or 100 points? So the more points it has, the more attention it should get in your mind. If it's only worth 1 or 2 points or 5 points, maybe I'm not going to die on my sword for that thing. Maybe I'm going to let that thing go because I want to make sure I really maximize the one that's worth 50 points. So I'm not saying have a short list. I'm saying make your list as long as possible. The sky's the limit. Get as creative as you can. Who knows what you can have there? And maybe there's time in the conversation to have a conversation about the 2-point stuff. But if you've got a limited amount of time and a little limited amount of attention across the table, then spend the appropriate time and energy on the things that are the most important. The other things are nice to have, or maybe I can squeeze something in at the last second. But don't spend all your time on something that's only worth 5 points.
That's a fun way of going about it too. Kind of gamifies it a little bit, takes a bit of the pressure out and helps you put your attention where it should be really placed based off your values and the things that you prioritize the most. So that's super helpful. Thank you so much, Fotini.
It also helps to help you quantify the stuff that's not so quantifiable. So remote work, flexibility, those types of things that may not have a monetary value, you can still make sure you put them in the list in the appropriate place.
Yeah. And I imagine these things are going to shift too, depending what life stage you're at, right? For someone that might be newer in their career, that's going to look very different. When someone is maybe starting to have a family, that might look very different for someone that's maybe a little bit further along in their career. So I think this is a great exercise that someone can do consistently to keep things in check when it comes to their negotiation criteria. I mean, you've shared so many incredibly valuable insights today, Fotini. I'm like loving everything about this episode. For anyone that is watching this or listening to this, if they were to walk away with just one practical negotiation tip that they can apply in their next salary negotiation, what should it be, Fotini?
Ask questions. I mean, they're the way to build relationships. They're the way to get you out of a jam. They're the way to make them counter-propose. They're the way to get information. There's so many benefits to it. It's your opportunity to say less, and you're going to get more. I mean, that's the title of my book for a reason. But questions are your tool so that you can say less, you can get more power, you can get more value, and you can get that problem-solving conversation going in a more effective way.
Amazing. I wish I could do a mic drop with this mic. Yes,
It'd be very expensive.
It might be. I don't think my team would like that very much. But honestly, that's fantastic. And I mean, there's so much power in the questions. And I think you've given us some amazing examples in today's episode too of where to start and how to inspire from that to see negotiation as a good thing. You know, it's a moment of self-advocacy. It's a moment to stand up for what you believe in. It's a moment to set an important milestone in the trajectory of your career. So I really hope that everyone listening to this episode is feeling empowered and excited to go after what you deserve with confidence. I want to thank you, Fotini, for being so generous as always with your insights. I love every time we have a chance to catch up, and of course, wish you so much continued success in the work that you do. It is so needed. If anyone is listening to this and they're keen to get in touch with you or thank you for the episode, where's the best place to find you?
I'm on all the socials. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn and Instagram, but on my website as well, there's lots of ways to get in touch with me there. So FotiniIcon.com. And I'm at Fotini Icon on all of the social stuff. So it's easy to not misspell my last name on everything.
Amazing. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I would also love to know from our viewers today what really stood out to you the most. Feel free to drop your biggest takeaway right in the comments below. I would love to read through and see what stood out. You could also hit me up on my social media. Let me know what really came up for you, what you're excited to put into action from the episode today. And of course, if you're at a point in your career where you really feel like you can benefit from more hands-on support to level up, go after bigger roles, the ones that you deserve, and show show up with confidence. My team and I would love to speak with you. Feel free to head over to my website. You can book a time to chat with us there, and we can learn more about you and what's coming up in the next steps of your career. Once again, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe. We have some amazing episodes continuing to come your way, and I never want you to miss a second of it. And thank you again, Fotini, for joining us here today. What a wonderful conversation, and I can't wait to keep in touch and go from there.
Thank you again for having me. I can't wait to hear the success stories from your audience.
Thanks so much.